Hi everyone, Kartik Krishnaiyer here for the Florida Squeeze. I've just returned from a multi-week trip abroad, which happened to coincide with the beginning of the Trump administration. And truth be told, I have not traveled much since COVID happened. I have not taken a single domestic flight since February of 2020. My last domestic flight was a flight from Baltimore back here to Florida to Jacksonville. And I haven't flown domestically since. I've driven throughout Florida, and I've taken a couple trips abroad. That's it. But this trip was very different than any trip I've ever experienced before, because there is a growing hostility to Americans abroad and a desire of anyone you talk to, anyone you meet. First of all, I went to the United Kingdom and I went to India and had a wedding in India that I had to attend, which was a big affair, right? With very influential people who are important in the Indian government and military attending. It just was very different than any other trip I've taken in my life, because everybody wants to talk about politics. They want to talk about the United States. They want to talk about Trump. They want to talk about the dangers from their view of the global order and Trump's presence. And I was actually surprised in India, where they have had a running issue with Canada the last few years, and I've actually very openly taken Canada's side in that. For those of you that that know me and follow me on other social media channels. By the way, my cats, they missed me a lot while I was gone, and so they're two of them have just jumped on the table to talk to me as I'm recording this. But the growing hostility toward the United States among just kind of influential people who were objective and had some sort of reverence for the U.S. And in terms of India, the United States, the largest Indian diaspora of influence, right? There's Indian diaspora in places like United Arab Emirates or Qatar, but they're just basically workers, right? And they have no political or economic rights there. But the two largest countries with Indian diaspora of influence in the world are the United States and Canada. The United Kingdom is probably third in that. We'll talk about the UK in a few minutes. But the sense that in spite of the hostility to Canada that India has had over the last year and a half, because the Indian government did, in my opinion, assassinate a Canadian citizen of Indian origin on Canadian soil. And I made this point about my concerns as an Indian person of Indian origin who was born in the United States and is an American citizen, that the Indian government may not like some of my opinions and may come after me, and may be enabled by the lack of action by the Biden administration to deal with a similar threat. There were some DOJ indictments, but nothing to the level of a diplomatic incident, which Canada made of what happened there, or now the Trump administration may be coddling the Indian government. But what I found in India was, one, India has progressed remarkably in the 6 years since I last visited. The Indian cities do not feel like cities in the developing world anymore, quite frankly. Now, how much of that is down to the authoritarianism of Narendra Modi and the cleanups of these cities and maybe forced clearance of slums and things like that's one factor. But two, I just think the country economically is growing. There's a huge middle class. You don't see any bicycles on the streets anymore of major cities. You see fewer and fewer motorbikes. You see people driving cars, which is remarkable. And you see the buildings and the economic activity resemble the West. So that was a takeaway, which means India is in some ways an economic threat to the United States. But that's not the point of this video. The point of this video is attitudes towards the United States are, how could you? We didn't know the American public was this crazily naive and this insular and this isolated in their thoughts. And I actually even defended Americans and Trump in one conversation I had, which was, hey, look, you guys are looking from outside. There are real economic hardship issues. Don't look at per capita GDP, where the US has raced away from Canada and UK and all these countries that was basically even with in 2009. raced away largely due to the work of the Obama administration. I should mention, has nothing to do with Trump, but look at just individual suffering, individual attitudes. There were economic reasons people voted for Trump. I don't agree necessarily with those economic reasons, but there are economic reasons they voted for Trump. But just in general, this is reinforcing or enforcing to a lot of people in their minds that the United States public doesn't understand the world as a whole, doesn't understand global affairs and global politics. So that's the takeaway from India. There's concern. You go to the United Kingdom and it's off the charts, right? I mean, there has always been, and I've spent a lot of time in the United Kingdom in my life. I'm American, but I've spent probably 3 or 4 times as much time in London as I have in New York in my life. Actually, maybe even more than that. Like, I've been to London about 15 to 20 times in my life. I've been to New York like 3 times. Been to Los Angeles 4 times. Chicago, like, since I became an adult, twice or 3 times, right? That's it. I mean, I've spent a lot more time in London and in the UK than I have in the major cities of the United States outside of Florida and outside of Atlanta and Washington, D.C. So I know the population there. I know the culture there. There's always been a condescending attitude towards elements of American culture, and there's always been a concern about American billionaires. And more recently, things like American private equity, hedge fund managers, all these people coming into investment banks, American investment banks coming into the UK. The UK, since Brexit, their economy has become more subservient to the United States. You can't even find enough British contractors anymore to award contracts to, if you're the UK government. This is something Ontario, under Doug Ford, who's obviously a conservative, progressive conservative, is trying to limit Ontario's dependence on the United States very smartly in advance of what's coming from Trump. The UK didn't do that. The UK, under Tory rule from 2010 to 2024, made themselves more and more subservient to the United States. And now there is major concern about that. Elon Musk's interference in British politics last month, his open interference has turned large elements of the British public against the United States, and more importantly, the British media. In my time in the UK, reflexively, and I consume British media even when I'm in the United States. I probably consume The Guardian and even The Telegraph, right, which is a right-wing paper, more than I consume the New York Times or the Washington Post. So I'd seen it coming, right, and I watched Sky News, I watched BBC World. But quite frankly, there is now just unchecked antagonism towards the United States in the British media, whether it's the left-wing media, which it's always kind of been there, or the right, or the neutral media, or the right-wing media, which now is beginning to mix their kind of pro Musk and Trump cultural analysis with some hardcore "this is bad" economic policy from the United States analysis. And what we're finding is, I think the British public, by and large, thinking the worst of Americans. They don't want they've never wanted American billionaires to buy things up in the UK, even though the Tory government allowed that to happen. And in spite of Labour's unpopularity now, the Labour government, and all the questions about the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, who I happen to be a very big fan of, and Prime Minister Starmer, I think the reflexive anti-Americanism I see going on in the UK means Labour might be at 22% in the YouGov poll, but if an election were held tomorrow, I think Labour would probably win. Because I just think that there are enough people who are like, okay, we don't want to turn this country back over to the Tories, who might, especially with Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader, who has not proven herself to be very capable in these last few months. That's something I think I can safely say, right? If you say that about an African-American Democratic leader, sometimes there's pushback within the Democratic Party. She's an Afro-Brit Tory leader, so maybe it's a little safer. But I don't think she stood out. She's too obsessed with cultural issues, right-wing cultural issues. Nigel Farage and Reform have emerged with sort of the backing of Elon Musk, although Musk doesn't seem to like Farage. Farage is pro Britain, right? And he's actually, I think, dangerous for the rest of Britain, for the unionism of Britain, because he's a English nationalist. You know, we remember Britain, UK is made up of 4 constituent nations, not just England. But I also think Farage, despite his close relationship with Donald Trump, is not someone who's going to give Britain over to the United States, which is something that Musk clearly wants for his own business agenda. Which gets me to the final point here. In the UK, there is a feeling that the United States is looking now to be predatory. That's the term I'm hearing, predatory. And predatory in business and predatory in terms of foreign relations. They're not looking to be a partner anymore. And the term predatory is going to stick with me. I have not heard that from the United Kingdom, from people in Britain before. I've not heard that term about the United States, except from China and Russia and right, those sorts of countries. So that's something to keep an eye on. So anyway, I'm back in the United States. You'll get to see more contemporary content from the Florida Squeeze. I programmed a bunch of things for while I was gone. I left immediately, like straight away after the inauguration. So I've been gone a few weeks, and I'm back now.